You wake up in Rome, which, if you were hoping smelled like fresh olive groves and lavender wreaths, is instead, well, pungent. Imagine a city of marble, aqueducts, and senators in snowy white togas, but also amphorae of stale urine tucked on street corners. It's like being handed the world's greatest postcard, and then realizing someone spilled pickle juice all over it. That's Rome for you. Glorious, overwhelming, and just a little bit ripe. And here's the uncomfortable truth: you probably wouldn't survive a day in this city, not because of gladiators, or plagues, or even the occasional fire that eats through entire neighborhoods, but because of the smell. You, raised on lavender-scented detergents and the promise of spring-fresh laundry cycles, would keel over walking past the local laundry. Yes, in Rome, laundry equals urine. Not metaphorically, literally. Welcome to the subtle art of Roman laundry, where your wardrobe owes its cleanliness to what the neighbors left behind after a night of Falernian wine. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. And I'd love to know where you are and what time it is right now. Picture yourself about to drift off to sleep, while across the world, another person is listening, maybe at lunchtime, maybe in the dead of night, both of you imagining the same streets of Rome. It's like time travel with pajamas. The funny thing is, Romans didn't even think this was gross. To them, it was practical. You pee, you donate, somebody collects it, and your toga comes back gleaming white. The system worked. The famous wit of Emperor Vespasian even lives on in a line he tossed at his son, Pecunia non Olet. Money doesn't stink. Except here, it definitely does. The city is alive with sound donkeys clopping, street hawkers yelling, fountains trickling. But underneath it all, you smell the sharp ammonia tang of jars left out to ripen in the sun. That's the raw ingredient. Workers called fullers will stomp your tunic in it later, like they're making a particularly nasty vintage of wine. And you? You just have to keep walking, pretending you're fine with the idea that your fresh toga is basically a pea-powered miracle. Historians still debate whether Romans really noticed the smell the way we do. Maybe the urban nose adapted, dulled by decades of public baths, open sewers, and fish markets. Or maybe the citizens simply layered so much perfume and incense onto themselves that the stench blurred into the background, like the hum of traffic in a modern city. What's clear is that nobody thought to change it. It worked, it was cheap, and it kept the empire's whites whiter than white. Odd fact for you, there's evidence Romans even imported Iberian urine for particularly large laundries. Just imagine explaining that shipping contract. Yes, we'd like 12 barrels of Spanish sunshine, and no, you don't need to know what's inside. Somewhere out there, a merchant was getting rich off pea exports, and we're the ones calling it boring history. Still, you walk the streets now, sandals scuffing stone, thinking, could I adapt? Could I just go with the flow, literally? Maybe. But then you catch a glimpse of a senator in a pristine toga, fabric so white it glows like he's auditioning for a detergent commercial. And you realize, someone, somewhere, had to stomp that thing clean. And they didn't use soap. They used what you flushed away this morning. And as the sun dips behind the rooftops, you catch yourself whispering the same thought every Roman probably had at some point. Please, gods, don't let me trip into the wrong vat. You turn a corner in Rome and notice something odd. Clay jars lined up like lazy soldiers, each one waiting for a passerby to make a very personal donation. They stand at doorways, tucked against tavern walls, beside bathhouses, basically anywhere you might suddenly feel the urge. You realize with a jolt that these aren't just trash bins for bodily functions. They're valuable collection points. P, in this city, is gold. Well, not gold-colored exactly though, yes. That too, but a resource, a commodity, part of the city's bloodstream. Imagine dropping your coins into a parking meter today, only instead of coins, it's, well, you get the idea. That's Rome. Emperor Vespasian, remember him from the smell money joke? Decided the empire should never waste a good income stream. So he slapped a tax on urine. Public collection jars became state-sanctioned money spinners, and your bladder was part of the imperial economy. If you lived here, you'd basically be a walking piggy bank, which is flattering in the worst possible way. And these jars? They weren't discreet. No wooden privacy stalls or scented screens, just open pots on the street gleaming in the sun. The next time you complain about a public restroom in a gas station, remember, at least it has walls. Here, you stand in full view of neighbors, strangers, and possibly your senator boss while you contribute to the laundry industry. It's democracy at its most awkward. Historians still debate whether people preferred to give their donations at public jars or whether many just stored it at home and brought it in like an offering. Some sources suggest households would collect chamber pots full, then hand them over to laundry workers in exchange for a few coins. Others argue it was more civic-minded. You use the jar on the corner, and in return, the whole community gets cleaner togas. Either way, the city was a well-oiled, well-irrigated machine. And it wasn't just the laundry guilds that benefited. Tavern owners were thrilled. Imagine, you run a bar serving gallons of cheap wine. Your customers drink, stumble out, relieve themselves right into your jar, and suddenly you've got an extra source of revenue when the fuller comes by with his cart. Talk about recycling. That's the ancient version of a side hustle. Odd fact for you. The Latin word for these collection pots was dolia curta, which translates loosely as short jars. They were sturdy, practical, and heavy. A modern archaeologist once calculated that a single jar could hold nearly 30 litres. 30 litres! That's a lot of communal Chardonnay aftermath. Now imagine those lined up on every street. Rome wasn't just built on 7 hills. It was built on amphorae of pee. Of course, it's easy for us to laugh, but these jars made laundry possible on an industrial scale. The fullers needed huge amounts of ammonia, and you can't get that from just one family's bathroom routine. You need the whole city contributing. The jars on the street corners were basically the empire's first recycling program. Sustainable, if not exactly fragrant. You step past one now, careful not to brush against the rim. A man in a tunic empties his chamber pot into it, wipes his hands on the wall because, why not, hygiene standards are different, and whistles as if he just dropped off a bag of flour. You, meanwhile, are practicing your best poker face, trying not to gag as the morning sun hits the liquid and turns the air into a wall of ammonia. But here's the twist. Romans didn't treat this as gross. It was so normalized that jokes about urine pots appear in graffiti and comedy plays. The playwright Plautus has a line where a character brags about out-drinking his buddy until even the fuller would thank me. Translation: he's bragging about being a human factory for the laundry trade. Today, that wouldn't exactly win you friends at a dinner party. As you keep walking, you notice boys darting between jars, daring each other to peek inside, shouting when one nearly tips. Somewhere nearby, a fuller with a mule-drawn cart is making his rounds, collecting the jars one by one, clinking like wine bottles but filled with something less glamorous. He'll wheel them back to his workshop, where the next stage of the magic happens. Stomping, rinsing, wringing. But for now, you're still standing at the corner, thinking that the Romans managed to make even peeing part of civic duty. And when you glance back, the jars don't look so strange anymore. They're just part of the streetscape, as familiar as fountains and temples. Still, you're grateful to be wearing sandals. You do not want to imagine what splashed across the paving stones when the jar overflowed on a hot day. Somewhere, in the background, you hear the emperor's coin-counting clerks nodding in approval. Rome runs on marble, military discipline, and, apparently, your bladder. You follow the mule cart clattering down a narrow lane, and suddenly the smell intensifies. It's not just the sharp tang of jars anymore, it's something deeper, heavier, layered with wet wool and hot stone. You've arrived at a fullonica, the Roman laundry workshop, and congratulations, your nose will never forgive you. The building is wide open to the street, so everyone can enjoy the spectacle. Inside, workers stand knee-deep in stone basins filled with diluted urine, stomping tunics and togas like over-enthusiastic winemakers. Their bare legs are slick, their tunics splashed, and their faces wear the expression of men who gave up on dignity a long time ago. You watch them lift sodden bundles of cloth, twist them, and plunge them back into the frothy liquid. The slap of fabric, the rhythmic squelch of feet, the grunts of exertion, it's like a strange music echoing through the alleys. And here's the kicker. This wasn't low-status work. Being a fuller was considered essential. Every Roman needed clean garments, especially the white togas of the upper classes, and someone had to brave the vats. In fact, fullers formed powerful guilds, with enough influence to carve their own statues and sponsor public games. If you worked the vats long enough, you could climb from stomper to manager, and maybe even become wealthy. So yes, stomping in P was technically a career ladder. Odd fact, archaeologists in Pompeii uncovered a fullonica so big it had 27 basins. Imagine the smell drifting over the city on a hot afternoon. They even found the stone benches where workers sat to scrub garments after stomping, and channels that carried the liquid away into drains. The whole operation was industrial, not just a few guys splashing about in buckets. Historians still debate whether the workers actually enjoyed any protection for their health. Standing in ammonia all day isn't exactly spa treatment, and some think the fumes must have shortened lifespans. Others argue that ancient sources are surprisingly quiet on fullers dying young, maybe because the job was so normalized people didn't notice. Or maybe, brace yourself, the Romans thought the smell was invigorating. One poet even joked that fullers lived longer because nothing foul will dare approach them. That's optimism taken to an Olympic level. As you lean against the doorway, trying not to breathe too deeply, a worker notices you watching. He cracks a grin, lifts a dripping tunic, and shouts something like, "Care for a turn?" You shake your head so hard you nearly lose your balance. He laughs, stomps harder, and the basin froths like a grotesque cappuccino. But the process doesn't end with stomping. Once the garments are properly soaked and beaten, they're rinsed in fresh water, then brushed with fuller's earth clay that absorbs oils. Workers slap the fabric against stone slabs, stretch it, and hang it to dry on rooftop lines. Sunlight, urine, clay, and sweat. That's the recipe for a Roman toga, so blindingly white it makes senators look like walking light bulbs. And it's not just clothes. Fullers also re-dyed fabrics, patched holes, and reshaped garments that had shrunk. Their workshops buzzed with chatter, gossip, and the steady rhythm of feet in vats. You imagine drifting off to sleep to that sound. Squish, stomp, squish. Almost like a lullaby, if your lullabies come with a side of ammonia. One worker tells a story of the emperor's collectors coming by to make sure taxes were properly paid. Even here, in the stink and steam, the treasury had its eye on the jars. The man jokes that the emperor should come stomp a few tunics himself, since he's already making money off them. Everyone laughs, but not too loudly, you never know who might report you. Another odd tangent. Cats. Romans loved cats in laundries because they hunted mice that chewed holes in stored wool. So while workers stomp and scrape, cats weave between their legs, tails high, probably thinking, "Why does everything smell like the worst litter box?" You can't blame them. As the day stretches, the workshop becomes louder, sweatier, more frantic. Customers wander in to check progress, grumbling if their tunic isn't ready. A young boy dashes off with a delivery, balancing folded cloth on his head, weaving through traffic like a seasoned courier. Outside, passers-by wrinkle their noses, but keep moving. This is Rome. Smell is just part of life. You think back to your own laundry routine, toss clothes in, press a button, walk away. Here, it's a full-body workout, a community hub, and a tax base all rolled into one. No softener sheets, no mountain breeze fragrances, just the subtle art of stomping fabric in what your uncle left behind at the tavern. And yet, standing there, you realize something strange. It's gross, sure, but it's also brilliant. A city of 1 million people needed clean clothes, and Rome solved it with nothing more than jars, clay, and determination. No electricity, no machines. Just humans, vats, and the eternal willingness to make the best of what they had. You take one last breath of the acrid air, carefully shallow, and step back into the street thinking, well, at least it wasn't your turn in the vat today. You've barely escaped the stomping pits of the fullonica when another thought dawns on you. All of this, every foamy basin and reeking jar, depends not just on civic duty, but on imperial taxation. You can almost hear Vespasian chuckling in the background, jingling coins, while the city collectively wrinkles its nose. Welcome to the economics of P. Picture Rome in the 1st century CE. The empire is sprawling, legions are expensive, and the Colosseum doesn't build itself. The treasury is constantly looking for new revenue streams, and when you rule the world, nothing is too small or too smelly to tax. Vespasian looked at the jars on every corner and thought, yes, this will do nicely. And so he introduced the vectigal urinae, the urine tax. You imagine the Senate chamber, as the decree is announced. Senators in spotless togas, freshly whitened by the very substance being taxed, murmur approval. Somewhere outside, fullers groan at the thought of paying fees just to keep their workshops running. And citizens? They shrug. If Rome taxes salt, grain, and harbour dues, why not bladders too? It's not as though you can stop producing the stuff. Odd fact, the famous line, Pecunia non-Olet money doesn't stink, comes directly from this tax. Suetonius tells us that Vespasian's son Titus complained about taxing such a disgusting thing. In response, the emperor held a coin under his nose and asked if it smelled. When Titus said no, Vespasian quipped, "And yet it comes from urine." With that, the phrase became immortal. You have to admit, it's a solid dad joke emperor edition. Historians still debate how much revenue the tax actually brought in. Some argue it was modest, just one of many small levies that kept the Roman economy balanced. Others believe it was surprisingly lucrative, since every household, tavern, and bathhouse contributed. Multiply that by 1 million residents, and you've got a steady stream pun entirely intended of taxable liquid gold. But beyond coins in the treasury, the tax had ripple effects. It formalized the urine trade, making fullers more accountable to the state. You can almost picture the bureaucracy, ledgers filled with neat handwriting, tallying jars collected from each district, clerks stamping wax seals on amphorae shipments. Somewhere in Rome, a minor official proudly listed, number of jars, 36. Payment received, 3 denarii. As if he'd just catalogued a shipment of marble. And then there's the social layer. Ordinary Romans started joking about their bodily functions funding gladiator games. One satirical poet even wrote that the emperor's dinner was seasoned with the smell of our streets. Imagine paying taxes today with something so personal you'd never forget it. But in Rome, it became an accepted fact of life. The trade also reshaped taverns. Owners could strike deals with fullers, promising regular collections in exchange for discounts or favors. Entire neighborhoods might organize around reliable jars, like little civic partnerships. You walk past one bar where a cheerful innkeeper brags, "Best wine, best jars." You're not sure whether to applaud or run. And let's not forget shipping. Archaeologists suspect that urine wasn't always local. Iberian ports shipped amphorae across the Mediterranean, adding yet another taxable layer. So not only was your toga whitened by your neighbor's contribution, it might also owe some of its glow to sailors hauling jars across stormy seas. Imagine explaining that to customs. What's in the cargo? Let's just say it's concentrated Roman detergent. Odd tangent. The Colosseum itself owes something to this tax. Vespasian began construction of the massive arena during his reign, funded partly by revenues from newly imposed levies. So, next time you picture gladiators fighting lions, remember that somewhere in the financial chain, a jar on a street corner helped pay for the stone blocks. The blood of the arena was balanced by the pee of the people. As you wander away from the workshops, you start noticing inscriptions scratched into walls, crude jokes about money and smell, graffiti poking fun at the emperor, and little doodles of jars with coins tumbling out. It's like ancient memes, painted in ochre. You can almost hear the voices of Romans laughing at the absurdity, while still dutifully dropping their contributions. And then you pass a banker's office, its walls lined with ledgers. The clerk inside greets you with a sniff, as though his own toga is far too clean to have come from such humble origins. You want to remind him. Every coin he counts might trace back to a jar on the corner, but you let it go. After all, in Rome, dignity and practicality have always gone hand in hand, sometimes holding their noses. By now you realize the Roman Empire wasn't just built on marble, roads, and legions. It was built on the ability to turn even the most embarrassing of human realities into revenue. Somewhere, Vespasian is still smirking. And you can't help it, you smirk too. You stop in front of a tailor's stall, dazzled by bolts of fabric in the midday sun. Silk shimmering like water, wool soft as cloud, linen crisp and pale Rome is nothing if not fashionable. But here's the secret. None of it would look so fine without the magic of those vats you just saw. Roman fashion was built on foul liquids, and the city strutted proudly in garments cleaned with what most people today would call a crime against laundry. Take the toga. It wasn't just a piece of cloth, it was Rome's uniform, its billboard. A senator's toga had to be so white it practically glowed, a walking advertisement for dignity. The trick? Urine's ammonia. Stomped into the fibers, rinsed with water, brushed with fuller's earth, then beaten against stone, the garment emerged several shades brighter. The result was dazzling, even if the process smelled like a bad science experiment. Odd fact. Pliny the Elder wrote that a good fuller could take a toga so yellowed with sweat and street grime that it resembled a sick chicken's feathers and make it shine like new snow. Imagine marketing that on a detergent bottle. From chicken to snow in 3 stomps. You have to admire the confidence. Historians still debate whether wealthier Romans secretly preferred soap-like mixtures, imported oils, natron powders, or even imported lye to urine-based cleaning. Some argue the elite avoided the stink, outsourcing their garments to more expensive laundries. Others counter that the state's tax records suggest even senators were dependent on the pea economy. After all, if you want 10 spotless togas a week, you need an industrial system, not boutique soap bars. It wasn't just about brightness, either. Urine also helped fix dyes. Deep reds, purples, and blues clung better to fabric when treated first with ammonia. That meant the empire's most coveted garments, purple-edged senatorial togas, crimson soldier cloaks, saffron festival gowns, owed their vibrancy to vats of fermenting liquid. Every parade, every triumph, every temple ceremony was a runway, fueled by the humblest of ingredients. As you wander the stall, a merchant tries to sell you a tunic, fresh from the fuller's. He waves it proudly, the folds crisp, the colour bright, the smell, well, still faintly there. You politely wave him off. He shrugs, muttering about foreigners and their delicate noses. In Rome, wearing something that had been through the vats wasn't disgusting. It was proof you cared about your appearance. Nobody wanted to be the guy in a dingy toga. It suggested laziness, poverty, maybe even moral decay. Spotless garments equaled spotless character. Odd tangent. In Roman comedy, characters are mocked for having stains. One joke runs that a man's toga was so filthy, it could be auctioned as farmland. You laugh, but then you realize laundry wasn't just hygiene, it was social survival. Turning up at court in a grubby toga could ruin your case before you even spoke. Imagine if your entire reputation depended on whether the corner jar was full last week. Fashionistas of the empire went further still. Fullers offered finishing touches, brushing fabrics with chalk to brighten them, applying sulfur fumes to bleach stubborn spots, even using wax to give garments a shine. In some workshops, garments were stretched over wooden frames, pulled taut until they regained shape, Rome's version of the ironing board. The results? Flowing drapery worthy of a marble statue. The irony? That drapery had spent part of its life in a vat most of us would cross the street to avoid. And don't think this was only for the elite. Everyday tunics also went through the process. The labourers who stomped in the vats? They too wanted their wool tunics to last. Even slaves, when permitted, had garments re-dyed or cleaned at fullonicae. Fashion was a sliding scale, but everyone depended on the same system. Urine didn't discriminate. As you leave the stall, a young man in a brand new toga brushes past, his fabric glowing in the sunlight. He smells faintly of rose oil and faintly of something else. You can't help but smile. Rome was a city that dressed to impress, and if that meant embracing the strangest laundry process in history, so be it. After all, you only get one chance to make a first impression, preferably in dazzling white. You're starting to wonder, how on earth did Romans live with the smell? Every alley you walk down seems to have its own distinct bouquet: fish guts from the market, smoke from hearth fires, animals clattering past, and somewhere in the mix, that unforgettable tang of ammonia. It's the olfactory equivalent of being whacked with a wet sponge, Yet Romans went about their days as though nothing were amiss. Maybe the secret wasn't to ignore it, but to manage it. Perfume, for example. Romans adored it. From the humblest tavern maid to the most gilded patrician, everyone dabbed on oils and unguents. Rose, myrrh, cinnamon, lavender, these scents floated through the streets, clouding the air like a defensive perfume army. Archaeologists have even found tiny glass bottles of perfume in Pompeii, delicate as bird bones, tucked into wooden chests. Picture an exhausted fuller trudging home after 12 hours in the vats. First stop, a generous splash of rose oil. It wouldn't erase the smell, but it might mask it long enough to enjoy dinner. Odd fact. Pliny records that some Romans used saffron as room freshener. They'd sprinkle it on theatre floors so audiences wouldn't gag on the smell of sweaty crowds. Imagine Broadway today handing out scented rose petals at the door. Welcome to Cats. Please scatter these around your seat. You can't fault the creativity. But back to the streets, nose twitching, notice how the smells change depending on the neighborhood. Near the Capitoline Hill, incense from temples dominates, covering whatever else lurks below. Near the Subura, Rome's crowded working-class district, the aroma is, let's say, more vivid. Meat, smoke, tanneries, fried fish, and public jars all compete for dominance. A poet once quipped that Rome smelled like a stew that never ends. You're inclined to agree. Historians still debate whether Romans genuinely found their city pleasant-smelling. Some ancient authors wax poetic about the fragrance of spring blossoms drifting through gardens, while others complain bitterly about sewage and sweat. One satire even describes Rome as a noses battlefield. Maybe it depended on wealth. If you lived in a villa with courtyards and fountains, the breeze carried roses. If you lived above a tavern, well, enjoy your nightly incense stick. And of course there were legal attempts to manage the stench. Municipal laws ordered waste to be carted out of the city regularly. Night crews hauled jars and chamber pots to dumps outside the walls, though whether they did it diligently is another story. You picture a mule cart rattling past, sloshing as it goes, leaving behind trails that no amount of perfume could disguise. The Romans themselves were fully aware of the irony. Seneca, the philosopher, once mocked city life by comparing it to breathing through a sponge soaked in odors. Yet he lived here, just like everyone else. Complaining about smells was a pastime, but abandoning Rome altogether? That was unthinkable. Odd tangent. The human nose adapts astonishingly fast. Spend long enough in a fullonica, and the ammonia fades to the background. The same way city dwellers today tune out traffic noise, Romans likely tuned out the smell. Only newcomers like you really noticed. Which means most of the jokes about stink in Roman plays were probably written for that shock of recognition. Ah yes, we smelled that too, once. As you walk, a woman passes, carrying a bundle of freshly laundered tunics. She smells of olive oil and frankincense, the faintest whiff of flowers trailing behind her. You can almost convince yourself it's enough to banish the harsher undertones. Almost. But then you round another corner, and bam, the unmistakable punch of another collection jar hits you in the face. Rome keeps you humble. Still, there's something strangely comforting about it. The city smells like work, like life, like millions of people bustling together. It's messy, pungent, a little chaotic, but it's real. And maybe that's why the Romans never tried too hard to fix it. In their world, a toga's brilliance wasn't ruined by the stench of how it got that way. You wore it proudly, nose lifted, perfume dabbed, pretending not to notice. You sigh, pull your cloak tighter and mutter, well, at least it's not fish sauce day at the market. You've now pieced together something important. In Rome, cleanliness wasn't just about hygiene. It was about status. The toga wasn't a garment. It was a moral billboard. A spotless white toga meant you were respectable, honorable, perhaps even virtuous. A stained toga? That meant you were careless at best, suspicious at worst. The city judged you not by your words but by your laundry. Picture the forum, bustling with merchants, magistrates, and senators. Each toga glows in the sun like a sheet of polished marble. Men smooth the folds with careful fingers, ensuring no hint of dirt clings. Why? because to show up in a dingy toga was like showing up to court in pajamas, people whispered. Judges frowned. Your credibility sagged with your fabric. Odd fact. Candidates running for office often whitened their togas with extra chalk dust to make them appear dazzling. That's where the word candidate comes from. Candidatus, the man in glowing white. So, technically, Roman politics was one big fashion show, powered by vats of fermented pea. Imagine modern elections if the key strategy were who has the brightest laundry. Historians still debate whether women faced the same obsessive scrutiny over spotless clothes. We know Roman matrons prided themselves on clean tunics and stolas, but literary sources mostly mock men for stains, perhaps because men's garments were expected to symbolize civic duty. One poet, Martial, pokes fun at a man whose toga was so spotted it could pass for Dalmatian fur. You don't bounce back easily from that kind of roast. But it wasn't only about politics. Everyday Romans internalized the message. Even a shopkeeper wanted to look sharp in a decent tunic. A soldier, coming home on leave, wouldn't dare present himself in grimy gear. Laundry wasn't vanity. It was reputation management. Rome was a city where gossip traveled faster than the aqueducts, and you didn't want to be the guy with the mustard stain. Odd tangent. Some philosophers, Stoics, naturally argued that spotless clothes were overrated. True virtue, they claimed, shone from within, not from whitened wool. But even Stoics weren't immune to public opinion. Epictetus, for example, told students they should still look tidy, because shabbiness of dress breeds suspicion. Translation: wear clean clothes, or no one will take you seriously. You watch a young man approach a fuller's stall, fretting over a wine stain on his toga. He insists it must be gone by tomorrow. He's meeting a potential patron. The fuller promises to work miracles. Watching the transaction, you realize it's the ancient equivalent of dry cleaning before a job interview. Success in Rome wasn't just about talent or connections. It was about appearing immaculately laundered. And then there's snobbery. Wealthy Romans sniffed at anyone whose garments didn't gleam. Satirists loved mocking nouveau rich types, who tried too hard, showing up in blindingly white togas, clearly overtreated, practically glowing like ghosts. There was a fine line between respectable brightness and blinding parody. Fashion critics, it turns out, are timeless. As the sun dips lower, you stroll past the Senate steps. Men debate loudly, gesturing with spotless sleeves. Their arguments might sway laws and wars, but to you, it all looks like a toga competition. Who has the purest folds? Who has the brightest hem? The city's fate, in some strange way, seems tied to laundry standards. And suddenly, you can't help but laugh. Somewhere in the Subura, a fuller stomps in a vat, his legs coated in ammonia froth. Hours later, his work will gleam in the forum, convincing citizens that Rome's leaders are paragons of virtue. The truth? Behind every moral toga is a man who spent the day ankle deep in what the tavern-goers left behind. Rome's hierarchy, you realize, is stitched not just with power and politics, but with clean hems and unstained folds. Dignity is measured in laundry loads. And yes, you can already hear tomorrow's gossip. Did you see his toga? Hardly worthy of the gods. You've grown oddly comfortable with Rome's pea-powered fashion system, but now your mind drifts to a question. Was this uniquely Roman? Did other civilizations stumble into the same foamy secret, or was urine as detergent Rome's personal claim to fame? Turns out, the Romans weren't alone in their creativity. Humanity has always had a knack for finding peculiar ways to clean itself soapless but resourceful. Start with the Egyptians. Long before Rome rose from its hills, Egyptians were already experimenting with natron, a naturally occurring soda ash found in dry lake beds. They used it for mummification, to scrub pots, and yes, for laundry. Imagine sprinkling white powder into a basin of water and watching grease vanish. Compared to stomping in fermented liquid, it almost sounds civilized. Then again, natron was caustic and could burn skin. A fuller in Thebes probably had hands as raw as any Roman worker's legs. Odd fact, the word soda itself comes from these early Egyptian compounds, which eventually traveled through Arabic into European languages. Next time you drink a soda, remember, it's linguistic cousins with laundry powder. History loves a twist. Meanwhile, Celtic tribes had their own methods. Julius Caesar famously observed that Gauls washed their hair with lime water, which acted like a primitive bleach. The result? Brilliantly blonde locks, stiff as straw. Caesar mocked it, but you can bet some Romans copied the look when they wanted to stand out at parties. As for laundry, Celtic women used wood ash pastes, mixing them with animal fats. That's right, essentially, early soap. Practical, even if it left clothes smelling like a burnt barbecue. Historians still debate whether the Romans ever dabbled with soap themselves before later centuries. Some say they imported it from the Gauls, dismissing it as a barbarian fad until they realized it worked. Others argue Romans remained stubbornly loyal to their tried-and-true urine vats, proud of their own strange brilliance. After all, why borrow soap when your empire is literally overflowing with jars? Jump over to Asia. In ancient China, records show people used fermented rice water and plant ashes to clean fabrics. In India, texts mention Retha soap nuts that foam naturally when agitated in water. You might laugh at the idea of laundry powered by tree berries, but modern eco-friendly detergents still use them. Meanwhile, in Japan, people relied on rice bran, stuffed into little cloth bags and rubbed onto garments like scrubbers. Compared to stomping in vats, this sounds positively spa-like. Odd tangent. Even the Maya in Mesoamerica had their own methods. Archaeologists found residues of saponins plant chemicals with soapy properties, suggesting they cleaned fabrics with crushed roots. Imagine parallel worlds. While Romans stomped in jars, Mayans were gently swirling fabrics in root foam. Two civilizations, half a planet apart, both determined to get grape stains out of tunics. And yet, Rome's method endures in memory because it was industrialized. Where Egyptians, Celts, or Mayans worked on smaller scales, Rome turned laundry into a city-wide operation. Jars on every street, fullonica buzzing with stomping, taxes filling imperial coffers, the whole system thrummed like an organ pipe. The difference wasn't the chemical trick itself. It was Rome's scale, Rome's bureaucracy, Rome's smell spread across 1 million people. As you ponder this, you notice a group of merchants from the east arriving with bolts of silk. Their garments are vibrant, glossy, clearly washed with something gentler than Roman vats. A Roman senator admires the fabric, then shrugs. Beautiful, but it won't survive the fullers. You almost pity the silk. Its fate is to be dunked in a tub of ammonia until it shines in ways the Chinese weavers never imagined. You take a deep breath, then regret it instantly as another cart of jars rattles past. The Romans may not have invented the idea of using strange substances to clean, but they perfected the art of making it unavoidable. Compared to natron, ash, berries, or roots, their method was the least glamorous, the most pungent, and somehow the most Roman of all. And in that realization lies a truth. Every civilization will do what it must to keep its fabrics fresh. The tools differ, the smells differ, but the determination is universal. Humanity has always fought stains with whatever came to hand, no matter how absurd. You smile, because the thought is oddly comforting. From Thebes to Gaul to Rome, history is really just one long struggle with laundry. You wander back toward the Fuller's Quarter, and this time you linger longer, watching the rhythm of an ordinary workday unfold. It's one thing to laugh about urine jars from a distance. It's another to stand shoulder to shoulder with the people whose entire lives are steeped in it. The daily grind of a fuller isn't glamorous. It's relentless, smelly, physical work, and yet somehow it holds the city together like stitches in a tunic. Picture dawn. The first light spills across the rooftops, and already the workshop doors creak open. Apprentices sweep out yesterday's sludge, while senior workers haul in jars collected overnight. Mules clop by, laden with amphorae, their drivers yawning. The vats are filled, sandals are tied tight, and then squelch, stomp, squish, the day begins. It's not exactly the sound of music, but it's the pulse of the neighborhood. Odd fact. In Pompeii's fullonica of Stephanus, archaeologists discovered colorful frescoes decorating the walls. They depict fullers proudly at work, stomping garments in basins, rinsing them, hanging them to dry. Imagine that a workplace mural, not of gods or gladiators, but of your own smelly job. It's as if a modern laundromat decorated its walls with heroic scenes of people folding socks. Strange, yes, but also oddly affirming. Historians still debate whether fullers were slaves, freedmen, or independent tradesmen. The evidence points to all three. Some were free citizens running their own workshops. Others were enslaved laborers, sweating for a master's profit. Guilds gave them collective strength, but the day-to-day reality varied wildly. What united them all was the same ritual. Hours in the vat, the sting of ammonia in the nostrils, the ache of muscles at day's end. And speaking of sting your eyes, water just standing near the basins. Imagine spending a lifetime in them. Ancient authors joke that fullers could be recognized by their pee-soaked legs and ever-watery eyes. But for many, the work meant survival. A fuller could afford food, rent, maybe even save enough to buy freedom or rise in status. In a city where bread prices soared and jobs were scarce, stomping in jars was steady employment. The grind didn't end with stomping. Once garments were clean, workers dragged them to rinse basins, beating them against stone slabs until the water ran clear. Then came stretching, brushing with fuller's earth, and finally hanging them on high lines to dry. Rooftops across the city resembled patchwork skies, tunic after tunic flapping in the breeze, proof of labor hidden behind white folds. Odd tangent, cats again. Fullonica often kept them around not just for mice, but for companionship. Graffiti in Pompeii records someone complaining, "The fuller's cat stole my fish." So even amid the vats, life had its small dramas. Cats stealing snacks, apprentices sneaking naps, foremen yelling about deadlines. Some things never change. By midday, the workshop buzzes. Customers drop by to check on garments, apprentices haul buckets, and gossip hums louder than the vats. News travels fast here. Who argued in the forum? Which senator's speech flopped? Whose daughter is secretly seeing a gladiator? Fullers may have been stomping in muck, but they were plugged into the empire's information stream. If you wanted rumors fresh, you went to the laundry. As the afternoon heat swells, the pace slows. Workers wipe sweat, rub aching legs, and laugh about the morning's mishaps. One man jokes that his sandals have shrunk from so much stomping. Another claims he's invented a new dance, and demonstrates, sloshing water everywhere. Even in foul-smelling labor, humor is survival. And then comes evening. The vats empty, the garments dry, the jars stacked for collection tomorrow. Workers spill into the taverns, reeking of ammonia but eager for wine. You follow one down the street, watching as neighbors greet him warmly. Nobody mocks the smell. They know, without him, their togas wouldn't shine, their reputations wouldn't hold, their city wouldn't run. You realize that in Rome, dignity and stink were two sides of the same coin. Every spotless toga in the forum carried the hidden imprint of these men's bare feet. Their grind was the city's polish. And tomorrow, at dawn, the squelch and stomp will begin again. The streets of Rome hum like an orchestra, and the laundry trade plays its own peculiar part in the score. You trail behind a fuller's apprentice as he shoulders a damp bundle wrapped in coarse cloth. His bare feet slap against the cobblestones, leaving faint wet prints that mark the way. Where is he going? Everywhere. Because the laundry business spills out of the workshops and into the arteries of the city itself. Streets, stains, and, inevitably, surprises. Every neighborhood has its favorite fullonica. Some specialize in whitening togas for the wealthy. Others deal mostly in tunics, cloaks, and workman's garb. The apprentice you follow cuts through a busy market where fishmongers shout prices, perfumers wave censers of smoke, and jugglers perform tricks for coins. And right in the middle of it, he plops down his bundle. Out comes a toga, stretched over a stone bench for one last brushing. Shoppers glance over, nod, and return to haggling over olives. Laundry in public? Perfectly normal. Odd fact. Archaeologists in Pompeii found drainage channels in streets running right out of fullers' shops. So, yes, dirty laundry water literally flowed into the city streets. Imagine strolling home in your best sandals and stepping into a puddle that is decidedly not rain. You'd curse, wipe your foot on your toga hem, and then ironically take that toga back to the fuller for cleaning. Rome was a cycle in more ways than one. Historians still debate whether fullers doubled as unofficial town criers. Some argue the workshops, noisy and central, became hubs of information. Customers dropped off clothes, shared gossip, and picked up rumors when they returned. Others think this is overstated, but the evidence suggests fullers were chatterboxes. Martial, the poet, once quipped that nothing spread faster than a fuller's tongue and a wine shop tale. You can practically hear the chuckles as apprentices carry laundry and news in equal measure. Back on the street, you watch as the apprentice delivers the toga to a client waiting on a shaded porch. The man sniffs it, checks the folds, and slips the boy a coin. Then he joins his friends, boasting about his gleaming garment. One mutters something about the reek of the vat, and everyone laughs. Rome's citizens knew the process was disgusting, but they admired the results enough to accept it. Smell, they reasoned, was temporary. A spotless toga was forever well, at least until the next wine stain. Odd tangent. Graffiti again. In one alley, you spot a crude sketch of a man holding his nose beside a jar, with the words, "Cleaner clothes, dirtier streets." Satire in chalk. Romans loved poking fun at their own contradictions. You can imagine someone pausing mid-errand just to add their 2 cents to the wall, smirking as they walked away. And the streets weren't just for jokes. Deliveries meant chaos. Mules carrying jars sloshed urine onto paving stones, apprentices jostled each other, and customers argued loudly over payments. The air was a mix of shouts, laughter, curses, and the endless clop of hooves. Yet, somehow, it worked. The city absorbed it all: laundry, water, gossip, donkey dung into its daily rhythm. At dusk, the scene softens. Laundry lines stretch across courtyards and rooftops, garments swaying like flags. From the street, you can look up and see the colors of Rome fluttering: reds, whites, yellows, each with its own story. A senator's gleaming toga, a soldier's dusty cloak, a tavern maid's apron. Together, they form a patchwork sky, reminding you that behind every clean fold is a day of stomping, rinsing, brushing, and yes, jars on street corners. As you lean against a wall, the apprentice who led you here runs past again, this time with an empty basket. He whistles cheerfully, unbothered by the day's stench. You wonder if he even notices it anymore. To him, the smell isn't an intrusion, it's simply the background note of Roman life, woven into bread ovens, temple incense, and the laughter of neighbors. Rome's streets, you realize, aren't just thoroughfares of stone. They're living laundries, where reputation, gossip, and stains all get carried along. And if you're careful where you step, you might even keep your sandals dry. You've seen Rome's laundry trade from the alleys upward, but now you begin to notice how even the emperors cast shadows across the vats. It's not just Vespasian with his tax joke, though, that one still gets laughs in taverns. Laundry, oddly enough, had imperial fingerprints all over it. From decrees to anecdotes, even the humblest stained tunic was tied, somehow, to the grand drama of Roman politics. Start with Augustus, the empire's first emperor. He loved moral symbolism. A spotless toga meant a spotless citizen. So under his watch, officials doubled down on the idea that outward appearance reflected inner virtue. He even passed laws regulating public behavior and appearances, expecting citizens to project dignity. In practice, this meant more trips to the fullonica for anyone wanting to impress imperial eyes. Imagine Augustus wandering the forum, mentally grading togas the way a teacher grades essays. Too dingy, needs chalk. Ah yes, this one shines. Odd fact: Caligula once joked about drowning senators in vats. Suetonius hints he said it half seriously, half in jest. You picture an emperor, bored with politics, imagining senators bobbing in tubs of ammonia. It sounds absurd, but in a world where emperors staged naval battles in amphitheaters, nothing was off limits. Historians still debate whether emperors genuinely cared about fullers as a profession, or just saw them as another taxable cog in the machine. Some argue guilds received patronage from elites, evidenced by inscriptions honoring benefactors. Others claim fullers were simply tolerated, necessary but never celebrated. The silence in many sources may suggest the latter. Then again, Pompeii's murals show fullers proudly depicting their work, so perhaps they had more clout than the literary elite admitted. And don't forget Vespasian's famous son Titus. The poor man had to live forever with the shadow of Pecunia non Olet. Imagine growing up in a family where your dad not only taxed pee but turned it into the punchline of history. At state dinners, someone must have whispered, "Careful with the wine. Titus, your father might tax it once it comes out again." Odd tangent. Domitian, another Flavian emperor, was obsessed with appearances. He enforced dress codes at public events, insisting people wear proper garments. That meant laundries were swamped before festivals and games. Picture the panic. Apprentices sprinting through streets, vats foaming overtime, foremen barking orders like generals. Somewhere in the chaos, a fuller mutters, all because His Imperial Majesty doesn't like coffee stains. But emperors weren't the only ones with influence. Local magistrates regulated waste disposal, ensuring fullonica didn't clog streets with runoff. Wealthy patrons sometimes sponsored laundries, funding new basins or rooftop drying racks in exchange for guild loyalty. In a way, laundry became political capital. Support a fullonica, and you had allies among the city's chatterers. Ignore them, and suddenly your toga accidentally didn't look as bright come election season. Meanwhile, poets and satirists never missed a chance to connect emperors with laundry humor. Martial, for example, wrote verses mocking the hypocrisy of officials who strutted in gleaming togas while making laws that stank of corruption. The metaphor was obvious. Shiny on the outside, rotten in the vat. And through it all, ordinary Romans watched with wry amusement. They knew their rulers demanded spotless appearances, while everyone else did the dirty work. They knew the treasury grew fat on jars while fullers soaked their legs raw. And they knew that every bright toga in the Senate carried the invisible imprint of mule carts and street jars. As twilight spreads over the forum, you imagine senators filing out of the curia, their garments glowing in torchlight. To passers-by, they look like marble statues come to life, pure, dignified, eternal. But you know the truth. Somewhere behind those folds is the faint echo of stomping feet, the hiss of rinsing basins, the clink of taxed jars. Rome's grandeur isn't just carved in stone, it's soaked into fabric, and as the senators vanish into the night, you can almost hear Vespasian chuckling again. Money doesn't stink, but it certainly launders well. You've seen laundry-shape politics and fashion, but Romans weren't done squeezing uses out of their golden liquid. The same jars that fed the fullonica also seeped into medicine cabinets and household remedies. To a Roman, urine wasn't just a cleaning agent. It was practically a cure-all, a one-stop shop of odd solutions. You might wrinkle your nose, but they swore by it. Take teeth, for instance. Yes, you heard that right. Writers like Catullus tease rivals for whitening their teeth with urine, especially Iberian urine, which was thought to be the strongest. You picture a man smiling proudly, his grin dazzlingly bright, and you think, do I compliment him, or do I just back away slowly? Pliny the Elder, ever the collector of trivia, calmly lists urine among acceptable mouthwashes. Somewhere in Rome, people were gargling before bed, convinced they were protecting their pearly whites. Odd fact, urine was also used for tanning leather and even softening wool for weaving. So if you think about it, a Roman's sandals, cloak and teeth might all owe a debt to the same source. The line between medicine and maintenance was blurrier than the Tiber on a foggy day. Historians still debate whether Romans genuinely believed urine healed wounds, or whether it was more of a folk remedy. Some texts claim it could disinfect cuts or ease burns. Others suggest it was more about superstition than science. Modern chemistry confirms ammonia has mild antiseptic properties, so maybe the ancients weren't entirely off base. Still, it takes a bold patient to say, "Sure, pour that on my arm." And it didn't stop there. Women supposedly used urine to lighten freckles or even soften skin. Recipes survive in obscure medical texts, suggesting blends of stale urine and milk for beauty treatments. You imagine a Roman noblewoman reclining in her villa, an attendant dabbing her face with a cloth, while another waves incense to mask the smell. Somewhere nearby, her husband nods approvingly, because clearly this is the price of beauty. Odd tangent. Romans believed children's urine was particularly pure and valuable for medicinal uses. The logic was that their diet was simpler and their bodies cleaner. So, yes, even kids were roped into the empire's endless experiments. That awkward school chore? Collecting a little pot for mum's skincare routine. Somewhere, a child was grumbling that this definitely wasn't in the job description of helpful son. The remedies extend into surprising corners. Farmers sprinkled urine on compost heaps to speed decomposition. Some households stored jars for stain removal, believing a dab of the liquid could lift stubborn spots. Others even used it as a form of pest control, splashing it around gardens to deter animals. You picture a Roman gardener explaining this proudly, while his neighbor mutters that maybe he's just scaring away dinner guests. Back in the fullonica, the workers joke about the healing power of their trade. One claims his perpetual foot rash is proof urine cures nothing. Another insists he hasn't had a cold in years, thanks to daily stomping. It's a debate no one wins, but they laugh anyway. And you can't help noticing the bigger picture. For Romans, nothing went to waste. If a substance could clean, heal, brighten, or repel, they'd use it. To them, urine wasn't embarrassing, it was practical. The very thing we treat as waste, they treated as resource. And yes, it's gross, but it's also oddly admirable. As evening settles, you pass a woman carrying a jar labelled for medical use. She disappears into a domus, leaving you to wonder whether it's destined for laundry, for a wound, or for a whitening rinse. In Rome, it could be any of the three. The city hums, practical to the bone, never letting a drop go to waste. And somewhere, Pliny the Elder scribbles another note in his natural history, useful for many things, though the smell is not to be ignored. You can almost hear him sigh as he writes it. By now you've smelled it, watched it, even almost admired it. But what did the thinkers of Rome make of this golden obsession? Step into the world of philosophers, poets, and satirists, and you'll find a city chuckling nervously at its own ingenuity, because while fullers stomped away proudly, the intellectuals of Rome debated whether dignity could really survive the stench. Take the poets. Martial, never one to miss a chance at a cheap joke, mocked acquaintances whose dazzling smiles gave away their secret. So white, it must be Iberian urine. It wasn't a compliment. His readers laughed, picturing society's elite swishing mouthfuls of imported jars. Juvenal, master of satire, rolled his eyes at politicians who strutted in spotless togas while their laws reeked of corruption. In his verses, Rome's laundry wasn't just about fabric, it was a metaphor for hypocrisy, clean on the outside, dirty underneath. Odd fact, one fragment tells of a philosopher caught in a fullonica, arguing about virtue while standing knee-deep in a vat. Was it true, or a comic exaggeration? Hard to say, but the image sticks. Socratic debate conducted over the squelch of stomping feet. It's the kind of scene you almost wish had been painted on a villa wall. Historians still debate whether philosophers genuinely condemned the trade or simply used it for easy symbolism. Some Stoics sneered at the obsession with spotless garments, arguing that true purity lay in the soul. Others were more pragmatic. Epictetus reminded his students to keep clothes neat, lest society dismiss them as slobs. Philosophical consistency aside, nobody wanted to be the guy in the dirty toga. Meanwhile, the satirists delighted in poking fun at emperors' involvement. Vespasian's tax became the butt of endless jokes. One comic line imagined him presenting a jar to the Senate declaring, "Behold, the empire's new treasury." You can picture senators pinching noses while still counting coins. Comedy thrives on contradiction, and nothing was more contradictory than Rome's dignity resting on amphorae. Odd tangent. Graffiti from Pompeii hints that even ordinary Romans joined the fun. One scribble reads, "May your toga be as yellow as your morals." Another, "He struts like a fuller's cat, proud of his stink." Sharp wit, carved into plaster for all to see. Apparently toilet humour really is eternal. But for all the jokes, there was unease too. Some writers worried Rome's reliance on such base methods revealed a loss of refinement. "We have conquered the world," sneered one critic, "yet our garments are whitened by tavern jars." Was this satire or genuine discomfort? The line between humour and shame was as blurred as a laundry day after wine-fueled feasting. You stroll past a library portico, where students argue over Stoic texts. One insists that outward appearance is vanity, another counters that society demands spotless fabric. Their teacher sighs, mutters something about Plato never having to deal with mustard stains, and dismisses class. The debate continues anyway, spilling into the streets. Rome, you realize, is a city perpetually balancing dignity against practicality and laughing nervously when the scales tip too far. As night falls, the poets gather in taverns, cups of wine in hand, trading insults about each other's laundry. You can almost hear Martial cackling. Better a stained toga than teeth polished in piss. The crowd roars, sloshing wine, uncaring if it spills. After all, stains can always be taken to the fuller's tomorrow. And you? You lean back, smiling at the irony. Rome may have been the seat of empire, philosophy, and law, but it was also the land where the highest debates were laced with jokes about jars. For all their marble monuments, they never stopped laughing at the stink beneath them. You've been steeped quite literally in Roman vats, but the truth is, Rome wasn't the only civilization willing to get creative with laundry. Humans everywhere faced the same battle, stains versus ingenuity. And though methods differed, the spirit was universal. Nobody was going to let a tunic, kimono, or robe go unwashed, just because soap hadn't been invented yet. So, let's take a wander across time and space, comparing cultures in their suds-free struggles. Start in medieval Europe. After Rome fell, many laundry practices lingered. Fullers still existed, though urine use waned in favor of wood ash and lye water. Picture medieval washerwomen along a riverbank, beating garments against flat stones, suds of ash swirling downstream. The process was grueling, and frostbite was a seasonal occupational hazard. Yet linens emerged cleaner, and towns thrived on their riverside laundries. Odd fact, medieval texts warn women against gossiping too loudly while washing, lest the devil sneak into the chatter. Laundry as spiritual battleground, who knew? Historians still debate whether medieval people truly never bathed, as stereotypes suggest. Evidence shows they did wash, often more than we assume. Communal bathhouses were common until church disapproval dampened the trend, and laundry cycles, though rough, kept garments functional. Some argue the decline of urine use reflected not squeamishness but a shift towards stronger chemical lyes. Others say the stench simply became less tolerable in denser towns. Shift further east to China, where by the Tang dynasty, 7th-10th centuries, soap made from animal fats and plant ashes appeared in written records. Laundry became more fragrant, imagine. Robes swished in perfumed mixtures, dried under mulberry trees. In Japan, as mentioned earlier, rice bran was the star. Housewives tied it in cloth bags, rubbing garments gently until the fibers gleamed. Compared to Roman stomping pits, it seems almost serene, though historians note that serene in practice probably meant sore backs and endless hours of scrubbing. Odd tangent. In the Islamic Golden Age, scholars described soap manufacturing in detail, mixing oils with alkaline substances. Soap bars, as we know them today, spread west from this innovation. By the time Crusaders returned from the Levant, they weren't just bringing stories of castles and relics, they were bringing suds. Imagine the surprise in medieval Europe. Wait, you can wash without vats of pee. Truly revolutionary. Cross the ocean, and you find indigenous peoples of the Americas using entirely different methods. The Navajo employed yucca root, whose natural saponins create a foamy lather. Mesoamericans had soap plants, while Andean cultures sometimes relied on clay to absorb grease. These practices weren't just effective, they were sustainable, tied to local environments. Compared to Roman reliance on industrial-scale jars, they feel almost elegant, as though nature had provided the detergent aisle directly. And then there's Africa. In parts of West Africa, palm oil and ash were combined into early soaps. Women along rivers pounded garments with wooden paddles, singing songs to keep rhythm. Laundry became communal, rhythmic, less stomping and more choreography. It wasn't only about stains, it was about society, about bonding, about gossip. Rome had fullonica. West Africa had riverside choirs. Odd fact, in Polynesia, laundry often involved the sea itself. Clothes were weighted down with stones in tidal pools, scrubbed with sand, and rinsed clean by waves. Standing there, you can almost hear the hiss of surf replacing Rome's squelch of vats. Both worked. Both left clothes fresh enough to wear with pride. And yet Rome stands apart not because their method was stranger, but because they industrialized it, taxed it, and tied it to empire. Other cultures experimented quietly with plants and clays. Rome built an entire economy around jars on every street corner. That's why when we talk about ancient laundry today, we don't imagine rice bran or yucca root, we imagine vats of fermented liquid in Pompeii. Rome didn't invent weirdness, but it made weirdness unforgettable. As you think on it, you realize this. Every culture found its way to cleanliness, but Rome stamped its brand on the concept with bureaucratic flair. Where others washed, Rome taxed. Where others rinsed, Rome stomped. And where others forgot, Rome left frescoes of men knee-deep in froth, immortalized forever. You take a breath of night air gentler now, faintly perfumed with temple incense and smile. Humanity, it seems, has always been willing to go to extraordinary, sometimes ridiculous lengths, just to look sharp in the morning. You wander now through the quieter corners of Rome, where shadows pool between columns and the smell of the day has softened into the night air. The noise of stomping vats has faded, the mule carts have stopped clattering, and only a few bundles of damp cloth sway gently on rooftop lines. The empire feels hushed, as though the very city has exhaled. And in that pause you realize, even Rome's laundry won't last forever. The fading echo of Fuller's Alley is already written into history. Time has a way of bleaching things out. Fullonicae that once thundered with work are now ruins. Archaeologists in Pompeii have uncovered them, stone basins still in place, frescoes still on the walls, as though workers only stepped out for lunch and never came back. In Herculaneum, jars were found intact, sealed beneath volcanic ash, their contents evaporated into memory. You stand in those silent workshops, half expecting to hear the squelch of stomping, but only dust answers. Odd fact. In late antiquity, as the empire fractured, many fullonicae were abandoned. The grandeur of spotless togas gave way to practical tunics. The obsession with brightness dimmed as survival took precedence. When Rome fell, so too did its industry of jars, at least on the same industrial scale. Some medieval fullers kept the craft alive, but the empire's peculiar pride in urine slowly slipped from memory. Historians still debate whether this fading was sudden or gradual. Did the vats go quiet overnight, or did they dwindle, one by one, as fewer senators ordered gleaming togas? Archaeological layers suggest continuity in some places, abrupt abandonment in others. What's certain is that the obsession dulled. Later generations preserved the phrase Pecunia non Olet, but forgot the daily squelch that gave it meaning. And yet, the traces linger. Walk the ruins today, and you still see the basins, the drains, the rooftop lines etched into stone. Tourists shuffle past, wrinkling their noses at the idea, while scholars smile at the practicality. The smell is gone, but the ingenuity remains. Rome's laundry may have vanished, but its lessons endure. Nothing is wasted, not even waste itself. Odd tangent. A few modern perfumers have toyed with urine notes in avant-garde fragrances. Don't worry, you're unlikely to find them at your local department store, but it's proof the Roman legacy lives on in the strangest corners. Somewhere out there, a perfume critic is muttering hints of citrus and just a touch of Vespasian. As you leave Fuller's Alley for the last time, you glance back at the shadows stretching across the stones. You can almost see apprentices rushing, jars sloshing, vats frothing. You can almost hear the laughter, the gossip, the stomp of weary feet. For a moment, Rome lives again not in marble monuments, but in the ordinary clatter of its laundry trade. Then the image fades, and you are left with silence. And maybe that's the true legacy. Not the stink, not the vats, not even the spotless togas, but the reminder that empires are built as much on mundane labor as on grand battles. Rome's glory gleamed because someone, somewhere, was willing to stomp. The echo fades, the air clears, and the night deepens. You close your eyes, imagining the city's heartbeat slowing, garments swaying gently in the dark, and jars waiting patiently for dawn that will never come. Now, Let the streets grow quieter still. The mule carts have long since rolled away, the last vats emptied, the final garments folded. The city exhales, and with it, you exhale too. Breathe slowly, deeply, as though you're drawing in the cool air of an empty Roman alley, free at last from the sharpness of the day. The stones beneath your feet are warm from the sun, but cooling now, steady and grounding. Overhead, laundry lines sway gently in the night breeze, white cloths catching the moonlight like soft sails. They move slowly, lazily, in no hurry at all. You feel your own breath take on that same rhythm, long, smooth, unhurried. Somewhere in the distance, a fountain murmurs. Water flows softly over marble, a sound that has whispered through the city for centuries. Its rhythm is steady, calming, like a lullaby written by stone and time. You let that sound guide you, slower and slower, until your thoughts themselves feel like ripples drifting downstream. There are no vats now, no jars, no clamour of work. Only the faint memory of them, blurred like chalk washed by rain. The smell is gone, the noise is gone, and all that remains is the stillness. A city asleep, an empire at rest, and you safe in the hush, wrapped in the quiet folds of the night. Let yourself drift with it, lighter and lighter, until the last torch burns low and even Rome dreams. The streets fade, the stars blur, and the fabric of time itself feels soft and weightless. Rest now, as the city rests. Rest now, as history itself closes its eyes.